The police officer looked me straight in the eye and said, "Sir, you are not the one in trouble here." I stood there in my grass-stained jeans, holding my phone with hours of recorded harassment, watching as 3 HOA board members turned pale as winter snow. Just 20 minutes earlier, they had been screaming at me to stop mowing my own lawn. They had threatened to have me arrested. They had called me a criminal and a trespasser on my own property. Now the real police were here, not the fake security guards they had threatened to call, not their imaginary authority figures, real officers with real badges who actually understood the law. The HOA president was fumbling through a stack of papers, trying to explain why she had filed false police reports. Her hands were shaking, the same hands that had pointed at me with such confidence just moments before. That was when I realized that sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. My life in the city had become a prison without bars. Every morning I woke up to the sound of traffic instead of birds. Every evening I came home to concrete walls and the constant hum of air conditioning units. My apartment building was so close to the neighboring complex that I could hear my neighbor's television through the walls. After 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder, I felt like I was suffocating. The meetings never ended. The deadlines never stopped. The stress was eating me alive from the inside out. My doctor had started asking questions about my blood pressure. My friends had stopped inviting me to social events because I was always working. That weekend in March changed everything. I was driving through the mountains, trying to clear my head after another brutal week at the office. The GPS led me down a winding road that hugged the edge of a pristine lake. The water was so clear I could see the bottom 20 feet down. Pine trees stretched up toward a sky so blue it looked painted. Then I saw the sign, "Lake Property for Sale." The number was handwritten on weathered wood like something from a different era. I pulled over without thinking. My hands were already dialing before my brain caught up. The realtor met me there within an hour. Sarah was a local woman who had lived by the lake her entire life. She walked me down a gravel path that led to a small cabin sitting on 2 acres of lakefront property. The cabin was simple but solid, built from local timber with a stone foundation that looked like it would last forever. The previous owner was an elderly gentleman who used it as his fishing retreat, Sarah explained as we walked around the property. He maintained it well but kept it simple. No fancy additions or unnecessary complications. I stood on the wooden dock that extended 30 feet into the lake. The water lapped gently against the posts. A family of ducks swam by without a care in the world. In the distance, mountains rose like ancient guardians protecting this little slice of paradise. For the first time in years, I could breathe deeply. The air tasted clean and fresh, nothing like the smog-filled atmosphere I had grown accustomed to in the city. This place felt like stepping back in time to when life was simpler and people actually talked to their neighbors. "I want to make an offer," I told Sarah before we had even gone inside the cabin. She smiled knowingly. "I thought you might say that. This place has a way of speaking to people who need it most." The paperwork moved quickly. The previous owner's estate wanted a simple cash deal with no complications. Within 30 days, I was holding the keys to my own piece of heaven. 2 acres of lakefront property, a solid cabin, and more peace and quiet than I had experienced in decades. I drove back to the city that evening with a lightness in my chest I had forgotten was possible. My colleagues noticed the change immediately. I started leaving the office at reasonable hours. I stopped checking emails after dinner. I had something to look forward to besides the next quarterly report. Every Friday afternoon, I would pack my weekend bag and drive those winding mountain roads to my sanctuary. The cabin became my refuge from the madness of modern life. I would spend Saturday mornings on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. But I had no idea that my peaceful retreat was about to become a battlefield. I had no idea that owning property in this idyllic location came with enemies I never knew existed. My first clue that trouble was brewing came in the form of a thick manila envelope taped to my front door. It was my third weekend at the cabin, and I had been looking forward to a quiet Saturday morning of fishing and reading. Instead, I found myself staring at an official-looking document with the header, Lakeside Community Homeowners Association, Welcome Package. Inside were 23 pages of rules, regulations, and restrictions that read like a legal textbook written by someone who hated fun. No noise before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m. on weekdays. No noise before 10 a.m. or after 5 p.m. on weekends. No motorized equipment during quiet hours. No modifications to property without written approval. No vehicles parked on grass. No signs or decorations visible from the street. The list went on and on. There were rules about paint colors, landscaping choices, and even the types of birds I was allowed to feed. I felt my peaceful morning slipping away as I read through page after page of restrictions I had never agreed to follow. At the bottom of the stack was a letter personally addressed to me. "Dear new resident," it began, "we trust you will find our community guidelines helpful in maintaining the property values and peaceful atmosphere we all cherish. Please note that all residents are expected to comply with HOA regulations regardless of when they purchase their property. Failure to comply may result in fines, liens, or legal action." The letter was signed by Margaret Thornfield, HOA president, in handwriting that looked like it was carved with a chisel. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah, the realtor who had sold me the property. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the tension in her voice when I mentioned the HOA packet. "Oh, honey," she said with a sigh that spoke volumes. "I was hoping they would leave you alone for a while longer. That group has been making life difficult for property owners around the lake for the past few years." "But I never agreed to join any HOA," I protested. "There was nothing about this in the purchase documents." "Technically, your property is not part of their official HOA district," Sarah explained. "But that has not stopped them from trying to enforce their rules on everyone within a mile of the lake. They claim they have authority over the entire area for environmental protection reasons." My stomach dropped. Can they do that? Legally, probably not. But they have deep pockets and expensive lawyers, and most people do not want to fight them. It is easier to just go along with their demands. After hanging up with Sarah, I spent the rest of the morning researching property records and HOA laws online. What I discovered made my blood boil. The Lakeside Community HOA had been established just 5 years ago by a group of wealthy property owners who lived in a gated community on the opposite shore of the lake. They had no legal jurisdiction over my property, but they had been systematically intimidating independent property owners into compliance through threats and harassment. By Sunday afternoon, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. Maybe they would leave me alone if I kept a low profile and did not cause any trouble. I decided to focus on the positive aspects of my lake retreat and ignore the HOA drama. That plan lasted exactly 2 hours. I was sitting on my dock, enjoying the sunset, when a woman in her 60s approached from the wooded path that separated my property from the neighbor's land. She was wearing a pressed khaki outfit that looked like a park ranger uniform, complete with a clipboard and an official-looking badge. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice that carried across the water like a foghorn. Are you the new owner of this property? I stood up and walked toward her, trying to be neighborly. Yes, I am. I am Tom. Nice to meet you. She did not offer her name or extend her hand. Instead, she flipped through papers on her clipboard with the efficiency of a tax auditor. I am here on behalf of the Lakeside Community HOA, she announced. We have received reports of unauthorized dock usage and potential environmental violations on this property. I looked back at my dock, confused. Environmental violations. I have not done anything to the environment. I have barely been here 3 weekends. She made a note on her clipboard. All lakefront activities must be approved in advance by the Environmental Committee. We also need to inspect your septic system and verify that your dock meets current safety standards. The friendly mask I had been wearing slipped away. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but my property is not part of your HOA. I have done my research. Her eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. Sir, all properties within the Lakeside Community Watershed are subject to our environmental protection guidelines. This is for the safety and preservation of our shared natural resources. She handed me a citation form with a fine of $200 for unauthorized dock usage and walked away before I could respond. I stood there holding the paper, watching her disappear into the woods like some kind of bureaucratic ghost. That night, I barely slept. My peaceful retreat had become a source of stress and anxiety, but I was not ready to give up without a fight. 3 weeks later, I woke up to a gorgeous Saturday morning that seemed designed for yard work. The sun was shining through my cabin windows, birds were singing in the pine trees, and the lake was as smooth as glass. My property had been neglected by the previous owner during his final years, and the grass around the cabin had grown tall and wild. I had purchased a small push mower from the hardware store in town, nothing fancy or particularly loud, just a simple machine to keep my 2 acres looking respectable. After my morning coffee, I wheeled the mower out of the storage shed and began the satisfying work of transforming my overgrown yard into something I could be proud of. The rhythmic sound of the mower was almost meditative, back and forth across the grass, leaving neat stripes of freshly cut lawn in my wake. The smell of cut grass mixed with the pine-scented air created the perfect Saturday morning atmosphere. For the first time since buying the property, I felt like I was truly making it my own. I had been mowing for maybe 20 minutes when I heard shouting over the engine noise. I looked up to see 3 people marching across my property like they owned it. The woman in the lead was the same clipboard-carrying enforcer who had cited me for using my own dock. Behind her were 2 men in their 50s, both wearing polo shirts and expressions of righteous indignation. I shut off the mower and waited for them to approach. The woman reached me first, already talking before she was within normal conversation distance. "Sir, you are in direct violation of community noise ordinances," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Motorized lawn equipment is prohibited before 10 a.m. on weekends." I checked my watch. It was 9:15 a.m. "Ma'am, as I explained to you before, my property is not part of your HOA. I checked with the county records office to confirm this." One of the men stepped forward. He was tall and thin with the kind of mustache that belonged in a 1970s television show. "Young man, I am Robert Patterson, HOA Vice President. What you seem to not understand is that environmental noise restrictions apply to all properties within a quarter mile of the lake, regardless of HOA membership status." The other man nodded vigorously. He was shorter and rounder, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. These regulations exist to protect the peaceful enjoyment of all community members. Your noise is disturbing families who are trying to enjoy their weekend mornings. I looked around at the vast expanse of woods and lakefront property. The nearest house was at least 300 yards away, and I could barely see it through the trees. The idea that my small push mower was disturbing anyone seemed absurd. Gentlemen, with all due respect, this is a basic lawn mower, not a bulldozer. I am maintaining my own property during reasonable hours. I have every right to do that. The woman stepped closer, her clipboard now transformed into a weapon of bureaucratic intimidation. Sir, rights come with responsibilities. You have a responsibility to respect the community standards that keep this area beautiful and peaceful. What I have, I replied, my patience wearing thin, is the right to maintain my legally purchased private property without harassment from people who have no authority over me. The tall man's face was turning red. Authority. We have been protecting this lakefront community for 5 years. We have invested our time and money into preserving property values and environmental standards. You cannot just move in here and ignore the systems that keep this place special. I bent down and grabbed the mower's pull cord. Watch me. The engine roared to life, and I continued mowing exactly where I had left off. The 3 HOA representatives stood there for a moment, apparently shocked that someone had the audacity to ignore their commands. The woman was writing furiously on her clipboard. The shorter man was taking photos with his phone. The tall man was packing back and forth like a caged animal, clearly unused to having his authority challenged. "This is your final warning," the woman shouted over the mower noise. "If you do not stop immediately, we will be forced to call the proper authorities." I continued mowing, making sure to create perfectly straight lines that would be visible from their position. Each pass of the mower felt like a small victory for property rights and personal freedom. "Fine," the tall man yelled. "You want to play hardball? We will call the police and have you cited for noise violations, environmental damage, and operating equipment without proper permits." The woman was nodding enthusiastically. "We have connections with the county sheriff's department. They take community complaints very seriously, especially when they involve environmental concerns." I finished the section I was working on and shut off the mower again. The sudden silence seemed even more dramatic after the noise of the engine. "Go ahead and call whoever you want," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "But when they get here, make sure you explain to them that you are trespassing on my private property to harass me for maintaining my own lawn." The 3 of them exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They were clearly not used to having their bluffs called. After a moment of whispered conversation, they turned and walked away, but not before the woman handed me another citation, this one for $300. As I watched them disappear into the woods, I realized that this conflict was far from over. These people were not going to give up easily, but neither was I. I spent the rest of the morning finishing my lawn, and it looked absolutely perfect. The escalation came faster than I expected. By the following weekend, I had received 2 more citation letters in my mailbox, each one more official-looking than the last. One was for unauthorized landscaping modifications, because I had trimmed some overgrown bushes. The other was for environmental impact violations, because I had cleaned debris from my section of shoreline. Each citation came with increasingly stern warnings about legal action and potential property liens. The letters were written in language designed to intimidate, full of references to county codes and environmental protection statutes that sounded official but felt manufactured. On Saturday morning, I decided to ignore their threats and continue with my planned property maintenance. I had purchased a small trimmer to clean up the areas around the cabin that the mower could not reach. It was quiet work, nothing that could possibly disturb anyone, but I had learned not to underestimate the HOA's ability to find problems where none existed. I was working along the tree line when I heard vehicles approaching on the gravel road. Not one car, but three. They parked in a line across the end of my driveway like some kind of blockade, and 6 people got out. The usual suspects were there: Margaret with her clipboard, Robert with his mustache, and the shorter man whose name I had learned was Gerald. But they had brought reinforcements. The new arrivals looked like they meant business. 2 were wearing what appeared to be security guard uniforms, complete with badges and radios. The third was a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase that looked expensive enough to buy a small car. Margaret led the procession across my property with the confidence of a general commanding troops. When they reached me, she did not bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Johnson," she began, consulting her clipboard, "you have ignored multiple community citations and continued to violate established environmental protection protocols. We are here to inform you that this matter is now being handled by our legal team and security consultants." The woman in the business suit stepped forward and handed me a folder thick with documents. "I am Jennifer Walsh, legal counsel for the Lakeside Community HOA. These documents outline the specific violations you have committed and the legal remedies available to our organization." I flipped through the papers quickly. They were impressive in their official appearance, filled with legal terminology and references to various codes and statutes. But something felt wrong about them. The language was too vague, the references too general. One of the security guards spoke up. "Sir, we have been authorized to document any ongoing violations and report them to the appropriate county enforcement agencies. We strongly recommend that you cooperate with this investigation." Robert stepped closer, his face showing satisfaction at finally having backup. "This is what happens when reasonable people try to maintain community standards and are met with stubborn defiance. You brought this on yourself." I looked at the assembled group and realized that they were putting on a performance designed to intimidate me into submission. The security guards were not real police officers. The legal documents were probably generic forms downloaded from the internet. But they were counting on me being too intimidated or too ignorant to call their bluff. "Let me ask you something," I said, addressing the group but focusing on the lawyer. "Do you have any documentation showing that my property is actually subject to your HOA jurisdiction?" Jennifer Walsh opened her briefcase and pulled out another folder. "Property rights come with community responsibilities, Mr. Johnson. The environmental protection statutes are quite clear about lakefront property maintenance standards." "That is not what I asked," I replied. "I asked for specific documentation showing your legal authority over my property. Not general environmental regulations, but specific authority." The security guards exchanged glances. Margaret was writing furiously on her clipboard. Gerald was adjusting his glasses nervously. "Sir," one of the security guards said, "we are prepared to contact county law enforcement if you continue to operate in violation of community standards. This is your final opportunity to resolve this matter cooperatively." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. "Go ahead and call them, but I want everything that happens from this point forward to be documented." The change in their demeanor was immediate and telling. The security guard stepped back. The lawyer closed her briefcase with a sharp snap. Margaret stopped writing and looked around at her companions with uncertainty. "Mr. Johnson," Jennifer Walsh said, her voice losing some of its authoritative edge. "There is no need for this to become confrontational. We are simply trying to maintain the community standards that protect everyone's property values." "Then you should have no problem with me recording our conversation," I replied, holding up my phone so everyone could see the recording indicator. After several moments of whispered conversation among the group, Margaret spoke up again. "Mr. Johnson, you have been warned. If you continue to ignore community regulations, we will have no choice but to involve law enforcement. Real law enforcement." As they walked back to their vehicles, I heard one of the security guards say to the other, "This guy is going to be trouble." He had no idea how right he was. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was at my office in the city. My phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize, and when I answered, a calm, professional voice introduced himself as Deputy Martinez from the County Sheriff's Department. "Mr. Johnson, we have received several noise complaints and environmental violation reports regarding your property at Lake Vista. We need to schedule a time to meet with you and investigate these claims." My heart started pounding. Despite all my research and confidence in my legal position, there was something terrifying about getting an actual call from real law enforcement. "Deputy Martinez, can you tell me the specific nature of these complaints?" "Sir, I would prefer to discuss the details in person. Are you available to meet at your property this Saturday morning around 10 a.m.? I agreed to the meeting and spent the rest of the week alternating between confidence and panic. I organized all my property documents, printed out my research on HOA jurisdiction, and prepared copies of every citation and threatening letter I had received. If they wanted documentation, I would give them documentation. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood perfectly. I drove up to the cabin early and spent an hour nervously organizing my paperwork and rehearsing what I would say. At exactly 10 a.m., I heard vehicles approaching on the gravel road. 2 Sheriff's Department patrol cars pulled into my driveway, followed by what looked like a code enforcement vehicle. 3 officers got out, along with a woman in civilian clothes carrying an official-looking clipboard that put Margaret's amateur version to shame. Deputy Martinez was a middle-aged Hispanic man with kind eyes and the confident bearing of someone who had seen everything at least twice. He introduced himself and his partner, Deputy Chen, a younger Asian woman who was already taking notes in a small notebook. The third person was Linda Morrison from the County Environmental Enforcement Division. She looked like she took her job seriously, but there was something in her expression that suggested she had dealt with frivolous complaints before. "Mr. Johnson," Deputy Martinez began, "we have received multiple complaints about noise violations, environmental damage, and unauthorized property modifications at this address. Can you walk us through what you have been doing on your property?" I took a deep breath and launched into my story, starting with the purchase of the property and ending with the previous week's confrontation with the HOA delegation. I showed them my property deed, my research on HOA jurisdiction, and copies of all the citations I had received. Deputy Chen was writing steadily in her notebook, occasionally asking for clarification on dates and details. Linda Morrison was walking around the property, examining the areas where I had been accused of environmental violations. "Mr. Johnson," Deputy Martinez said after I finished my explanation, "can you show us exactly what modifications you have made to the property?" I led them around the entire 2 acres, pointing out the grass I had mowed, the bushes I had trimmed, and the shoreline debris I had cleaned up. The deputy was nodding thoughtfully as we walked, occasionally asking Linda Morrison for her professional opinion on various aspects of the property maintenance. After about 30 minutes of inspection, Deputy Martinez asked to see the citations I had received. He examined each one carefully, comparing them to something in his own paperwork. "Mr. Johnson, these citations are not issued by any county agency or recognized authority," he said, holding up one of Margaret's official-looking forms. "Do you know who issued these?" I explained about the HOA group and their claims of Environmental Protection Authority. Deputy Chen was writing furiously now, and Linda Morrison was shaking her head with obvious frustration. "Sir," Linda Morrison said, "I want to be very clear about something. Your property maintenance activities are completely normal and legal. Mowing grass, trimming bushes, and cleaning shoreline debris are standard homeowner activities that require no permits or special approvals." Deputy Martinez was studying the legal documents that Jennifer Walsh had given me the previous week. "Mr. Johnson, I need to ask you about these individuals who have been issuing citations and making threats. Do you have any way to contact them?" I showed him the contact information from the HOA letters. He exchanged glances with his partner before speaking again. "Sir, issuing fake citations and impersonating government authority are serious crimes. Making false police reports is also a criminal offense. We are going to need to investigate this HOA group further." The relief I felt was overwhelming. After weeks of feeling like I was fighting invisible enemies with unlimited power, I finally had real authorities who understood the situation and took it seriously. Deputy Chen looked up from her notebook. "Mr. Johnson, do you have any recordings or additional documentation of these encounters?" I showed them the video I had taken during the previous week's confrontation. As Deputy Martinez watched the footage on my phone, his expression grew increasingly serious. "Sir, this appears to show harassment and potentially criminal intimidation. We are going to need copies of all your documentation, and we will be contacting these individuals for questioning." Linda Morrison was examining one of the fake citations under a magnifying glass she had pulled from her equipment bag. "Deputy Martinez, these documents are designed to look like official county paperwork, but they are completely fraudulent. Someone put a lot of effort into making these appear legitimate." As the officers prepared to leave, Deputy Martinez handed me his business card. "Mr. Johnson, if anyone from this group contacts you again, I want you to call me immediately. Do not engage with them alone and continue documenting everything." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had allies instead of enemies. Justice was finally coming to Lakeside Community. The phone call came 3 days later. Deputy Martinez's voice carried a satisfaction that I could hear through the phone line. "Mr. Johnson, we need you to come down to the sheriff's department tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We have some developments in your case that I think you will find very interesting." When I arrived at the sheriff's department, I was led to a conference room where Deputy Martinez, Deputy Chen, and Linda Morrison were waiting with files spread across a large table. The amount of paperwork was impressive and slightly intimidating. "Mr. Johnson, please have a seat," Deputy Martinez said, gesturing to a chair across from the assembled documents. "We have been very busy investigating the Lakeside Community HOA, and what we discovered is quite remarkable." Deputy Chen opened the first file. "We started by researching the legal status of this HOA organization. What we found is that while they are a legitimate registered homeowners association, Their jurisdiction covers only 12 properties in a gated community on the east side of the lake. Your property, and at least 15 other properties around the lake, are completely outside their legal authority. Linda Morrison picked up the explanation. We also investigated their claims about Environmental Protection Authority. The County Environmental Department has no record of any agreement or delegation of authority to this group. They have been operating completely outside the law. Deputy Martinez leaned forward. But that is just the beginning. When we contacted the HOA board members for questioning, we discovered a pattern of harassment and intimidation that extends far beyond your case. He opened another file and spread out a collection of documents that looked familiar. Citation forms, threatening letters, and official-looking paperwork that I recognized from my own experience. We found 17 other property owners who have been receiving similar fake citations and threats over the past 2 years, Deputy Chen explained. Most of them paid the fines rather than fight the system, believing they were legitimate government penalties. My stomach dropped. They were actually collecting money from these fake fines. Over $40,000 in the past 2 years, Linda Morrison confirmed. Collected through an elaborate scheme of fake environmental citations, fraudulent safety violations, and completely fabricated community standards enforcement. Deputy Martinez opened the largest file on the table. Margaret Thornfield, Robert Patterson, and Gerald Stevens have been charged with multiple felonies including fraud, extortion, harassment, and impersonating government officials. Jennifer Walsh, their so-called lawyer, has been reported to the State Bar Association for ethics violations. What about the security guards? I asked, remembering their intimidation tactics. Those were hired actors, Deputy Chen said with obvious disgust. The HOA paid $200 each to have them dress up in fake uniforms and pretend to be law enforcement. They have been charged with impersonating police officers. Linda Morrison pulled out a calculator and showed me a list of numbers. Mr. Johnson, based on our investigation, the Lakeside Community HOA owes fines and penalties totaling over $15,000 for various county code violations, environmental infractions, and illegal business operations. But wait, Deputy Martinez said with a smile, it gets better. He opened one final file that was thicker than all the others combined. During our investigation of their fake environmental claims, we discovered that the HOA's own gated community has been operating with multiple code violations for years. Illegal dock modifications, unpermitted landscaping changes, and sewage system problems that violate actual environmental protection laws. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. So while they were harassing everyone else about fake environmental violations, they were committing real ones. Exactly, Linda Morrison confirmed. We have issued citations and fines totaling over $30,000 to various properties within their actual HOA jurisdiction. Their community will need to make significant corrections or face closure of their private lake access. Deputy Chen was smiling now. Mr. Johnson, there is one more thing. We have been in contact with the other property owners who were victimized by this scheme. Several of them are pursuing civil lawsuits against the HOA for damages, harassment, and emotional distress. And Deputy Martinez added, the county attorney's office is considering additional criminal charges related to the organized nature of this fraud scheme. This was not just a few neighbors getting carried away with community rules. This was a systematic criminal enterprise. As I sat there absorbing this information, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. vindication because my instincts had been right and justice was being served, sadness because so many other property owners had suffered harassment and financial losses before anyone took action. "What happens now?" I asked. Linda Morrison gathered her files. "Now the legal system takes over. The criminal cases will proceed through the courts. The civil lawsuits will be resolved separately, and the county will continue monitoring the area to prevent any similar schemes." Deputy Martinez stood up and extended his hand. "Mr. Johnson, I want to thank you for standing up to these people and providing the documentation we needed to build our case. If you had just paid their fake fines and stayed quiet, they would still be victimizing other property owners." As I drove back to my cabin that afternoon, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for months. The lake looked exactly the same as it had on that first day when I fell in love with the property. But now, I knew that my right to enjoy it was protected by more than just property deeds and legal documents. It was protected by justice. 6 months later, I was sitting on my dock with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, just like I had dreamed when I first bought the property. But this morning felt different from all those early mornings when I had been looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next confrontation with HOA enforcers. The criminal trials had concluded the previous month. Margaret Thornfield received 18 months in prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to all the property owners they had defrauded. Robert Patterson and Gerald Stevens received shorter sentences but substantial fines and community service requirements. Jennifer Walsh lost her law license and faced additional civil penalties for her role in the scheme. The fake security guards pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges and were banned from working in any capacity that involved security or law enforcement. The actors who had been hired to intimidate property owners received probation and were required to write letters of apology to everyone they had harassed. But the most satisfying outcome was watching the transformation of the lake community itself. Once the HOA's reign of terror ended, property owners began talking to each other for the first time in years. We discovered that we actually had a lot in common and shared similar values about respecting both property rights and environmental responsibility. A group of us formed a voluntary lake preservation association that focuses on real environmental protection through education and cooperation, rather than fake citations and harassment. We organize annual lake cleanup days, share information about best practices for lakefront property maintenance, and work together with county officials on legitimate conservation efforts. The financial impact on the HOA was devastating. The combination of criminal fines, civil lawsuit judgments, and county code violation penalties forced them to sell several properties in their gated community to pay their debts. Their private lake access was suspended for 6 months, while they corrected years of environmental violations they had ignored while harassing everyone else. My own property became everything I had hoped it would be when I first saw that handwritten, "For sale" sign. I spend most weekends at the cabin now, and several evenings during the week when I need to escape the city. The stress that had been eating me alive has gradually faded, replaced by the peace I had been seeking. I learned valuable lessons from this experience that extend far beyond property ownership disputes. The most important lesson is that bullies rely on intimidation and the assumption that their victims will not fight back. They count on people being too busy, too scared, or too uninformed to challenge their authority. Documentation saved me. Every video recording, every photograph, every saved voicemail and email became evidence that real law enforcement could use to build their case.